Welcome to All Villa, No Filler, a podcast all about Aston Villa. Don't forget to subscribe for more interviews like this one. Now, this week, Villa were linked with a move for Sporting's highly rated midfielder, Pedro Gonçalves. Today, I'm joined by the football writer, Zach Lowy, who is co-creator of Breaking the Lines. He regularly covers Portuguese football. So, Zach, welcome to All Villa, No Filler.
It's a pleasure to be on. Really excited to be discussing Pedro Gonçalves today, and an honor to be discussing Aston Villa, one of England's most historic clubs.
Well, thank you very much. Good to have you on. And we'll get straight to it. What type of a player is Pedro Gonçalves?
Yeah, Pedro Gonçalves, he's an incredibly versatile player. I first started following him in 2019-20, so he's had quite the interesting rise. He's played for the likes of Braga, Valencia, Wolves, but really started to make an impact in the 2019-20 season, joining Famalicão, and in their first season in the top flight in 19 years, they were able to challenge for European football up until the final day of the season, and Pedro Gonçalves was really a massive part in that. And I think that we saw him utilized more as in attacking midfielder in a midfield trio, so perhaps more of a interior midfielder, right? Then the following season, he gets a move to Sporting, and they were able to secure him on a fairly low-cost deal by giving Famalicão a fairly significant portion of his resale clause. So I think that I believe that Sporting still do not have 100% of Pedro Gonçalves, so that would obviously be something that would come up in negotiations. But yeah, at Sporting, it's hard to overstate how much of an impact he made in his first season. Sporting going from finishing fourth in the league to winning their first league title in 19 years, and that was that was in large part due to Pedro Gonçalves' fantastic form. And here we saw him not necessarily in a midfield role, but actually more utilized in the front three, playing both on the left and the right, and really just able to cut inside, create danger, and I think just provide something that they had been missing since Bruno Fernandes' departure to Manchester United, or previously in that year. But it would be wrong, I think, to clarify, to state that Pedro Gonçalves is a like-for-like replacement for Bruno. They are two different players, but he's definitely capable of offering something that they had been missing in that regard. So yeah, he finished as the top scorer in the league with 23 goals. Interestingly enough, Haris Seferovic had scored a brace the prior day to go to go top of the scoring charts with 22 goals. Pedro Gonçalves scored a hat trick on the final day of the season to finish with 23 goals and to become the first Portuguese player since, I believe, 1996 to finish as top scorer in the league. So yeah, massive achievement for him. I think that he got a move. He got a call up to the European Championship the following summer and wasn't really utilized that much. Following season, we saw a drop off in his performances for sure, and that is something that definitely continued at certain points this season. There were definitely times where I felt that Ruben Amorim was sticking with him in the lineup no matter what, and not taking him off when he was perhaps worse than other players. But I do think that we are seeing Pedro Gonçalves coming back into his best form. He is obviously Sporting's top scorer, and he's proving that he can be a really important player in several positions. So one thing that Pedro Gonçalves has actually had to deal with this season is he's been kind of pushed around from the front three to the midfield pivot. So that's been as a result of, of course, Sporting losing both João Palhinha and Matheus Nunes, injuries and suspensions to key players. So yeah, Pedro Gonçalves has had to operate in multiple different positions. I think that's something he's definitely still getting used to. But we are seeing him chip in and perform very well in two very different roles, and I think that's massive credit to the player's intelligence.
Okay, yeah, I mean, his versatility seems to be something that really sticks out, particularly when you consider where the different positions he's played over the years. And that particularly is something that Unai Emery at Aston Villa seems to like in his players. He likes to have a bit of versatility, which is, I think, why we might have been linked with Matteo Guendouzi as well at Marseille, who can play in a variety of roles. But when it comes to Goncalves, what would you say are his main strengths?
Yeah, so I think that Pedro Gonçalves, he's a very comfortable player under pressure. He likes to have possession. He likes to pick up the ball, drive forward, and carry it forward. He's also very skilled in terms of his finishing ability, although we haven't seen the same fantastic goal scoring ability that we saw in 2020-21 when he won the top scorer award. He is still a very capable finisher. So I think that he's an intelligent player in the final third. He's incredibly versatile. Yeah, he's a player who I think is capable of playing in multiple roles and really, not shying away from the pressure. He wants to be the player who's going to get Sporting out of the jam, dribble past two or three players and, open up a goal scoring scenario with a fantastic pass. So yeah, he's very much, I think, Sporting's most creative player, whether he's playing in midfield or in the front three. I don't think that he's the most rapid player, but he still has plenty of pace to burn on the counter, and would be helpful for Unai Emery's side in that respect in terms of counterattacking. So yeah, very much. I think that his ability to create danger both on the counterattack as well as picking the pass against a deep block, it definitely makes him a really important player for Sporting. We're seeing him kind of have a lot more impact, and Sporting have really had to rely on him after the departure of their best attacker last season in Pablo Sarabia. Of course, the departure of their best wingback in Pedro Porro. So I think that in many ways, Sporting have kind of had to go through an identity crisis this season. Is the 3-4-3 system still the right way to go? Who should be the starters? It's been fairly turbulent for them, of course, losing so many key players and having kind of some shaky domestic results. But with that being said, they are still alive in the Europa League quarterfinals, and they have a decent chance of getting back into the top three, and the Champions League football still got a lot of work to do. But it goes without saying that Pedro Gonçalves has been very important in them entering April with a pretty strong run of form and overall kind of getting some consistent performances underway.
Okay, well, given that versatility that he has, and you just mentioned, where do you think his best position is?
Yeah, so that's a tricky one. I think that I would probably say it really depends on the formation. If you're going to go with a 4-3-3, then I think that he's better off as an interior midfielder as opposed to a pure winger. I wouldn't say that he's like, I don't think that he's necessarily a player who's going to drive at fullbacks, and run in behind like for example, a player like Bukayo Saka. I don't see that same kind of ability. But with that being said, I do think that if you have a really attack minded fullback, if you can get someone, whether that's on Villa like Matty Cash or Alex Moreno, if you can get them, constantly pushing forward, providing width, I think that playing Pedro Gonçalves on the wing also wouldn't be the worst idea, because that's going to give him time and space to cut inside and pick apart defenses. And I think that's one thing that he's really good at. He knows if you give him someone who's gonna free up that space, he's going to be able to make the right decision, right? Whether that's driving inside and picking a through ball, or having a go at the goalkeeper. He's got some pretty dangerous long shots that of course, we saw against Arsenal, but capable of making a dangerous shot from long range, and I do think that's something that could attract Aston Villa to signing him as well as many other clubs. So yeah, I think that he's definitely a player who, shall we say, who thrives when the team is built around him. I guess is the right phrase of putting it. We saw that in many regards at the Famalicão team in 2019-20. I mean, that team was composed of some brilliant players. Tony Martinez, a center forward at Porto right now. Uros Rasic, currently on loan from Valencia at Braga. Gustavo Assunção, some fantastic players. But with that being said, Pedro Gonçalves was definitely the creative technician in that team. So, it's clear that he has been utilized in a much deeper role this season. He's been tasked with doing things that he perhaps wasn't as used to in previous years, such as dropping deep, having more work on the defensive side of things. I do think that it's worth mentioning that, of course, Sporting play a back three, whether that's Gonçalo Inácio, Ousmane Diomande, Sebastian Coates, Jeremiah St. Just. They have three players to provide stability, and you're also going to have, depending on the scenario, of course, we saw it with Arsenal playing two kind of defensive-minded wingbacks with Ricardo Escaio and Mateus Reis. So that's one thing that I would say with Pedro Gonçalves. A lot of this depends on the context. Okay, if you're gonna expect him to play in a double pivot role and kind of almost as a N'Golo Kante type player, I think that you're gonna waste his abilities. But I think that if you give him a certain amount of creative freedom, then there's a good chance that you could get, maybe not the 23 goal player that we saw 2 years ago, but certainly a player who's capable of making an impact at the Premier League level. I know that Villa, they still are kind of searching for that key playmaker. I'm not sure what the deal is with Philippe Coutinho right now. I know that Emiliano Buendia and Jacob Ramsey, those players have definitely been making an impact. So I do feel like there's definitely some potential for Pedro Gonçalves to slot in there as more of an attack-minded player. I think that going forward, Unai Emery could have potentially Douglas Luiz and Boubacar Kamara as a double pivot. I think that would be a really balanced midfield pair. And then that would almost allow Pedro Gonçalves to be utilized perhaps behind the striker, whether that's Ollie Watkins or someone else. Having someone, perhaps Jacob Ramsey, who's of course very good at off the ball movement and also putting in a shift defensively, and then have someone perhaps more of a pure winger type, like I don't know, Leon Bailey or someone else. I think that would be a good way of getting the most out of him, because I think that if I had to go with the best position for Pedro Gonçalves, it would probably be a number 10, even though he hasn't really operated in that traditional 4-2-3-1 formation. I do kind of associate his game with those traditional 10s, such as Riquelme, James, Ozil. I think that he is a similar player. With that being said, we always talk about the death of the number 10, right? The position kind of dying out and becoming extinct. And I think that you won't see that with Pedro Gonçalves, because he is very much a player who is capable of playing in multiple roles, and who, despite the fact that he is fairly undersized, is not going to shy away from physical battles.
Okay. So that's good that'd be good for the Premier League, I guess. He's scored 17 goals in total this season, 9 assists. That includes the outrageous effort against Arsenal in the Europa League at the Emirates just last week. How much interest are you expecting in him this summer?
I'm expecting, I'm expecting a decent amount of interest. Like I said, I think that Sporting will probably need to sort out this resale thing with Famalicão. I am fairly close with the Famalicão president, and he has confirmed to me that they still have a portion of the resale thing. So I would probably expect Sporting to go to Fama and offer a package of money for them to get 100% or 90% or whatever, so that they can get the bulk of the transfer fee before they sell him. But, with that being said, I think that I think that a lot of it depends on what happens in Europe, because it's going to be very hard for Sporting to salvage their season domestically. They, of course, lost to Porto in the Taça da Liga final. They've been out of Taça de Portugal for a few months. They are currently fourth in the league, have an outside chance of, getting into the top three, getting Champions League football. If they don't get Champions League football, if they were to, for example, lose in the Europa League final and finish fourth, then of course that would be a massive blow for them. And we've seen Sporting, despite the fact that they've gotten Champions League football the past 2 seasons, they've still had to sell so many players such as Nuno Mendes, Pedro Porro, Palhinha. But to be honest with you, I think that the 2 players who I think would come to my mind first for a potential departure from Sporting is Manuel Ugarte and Marcus Edwards. I think it's definitely, I definitely think that Ugarte will be the prized asset that every team in Europe is going to want to get their hands on. The secondary player, I think it's definitely between Pedro Gonçalves, Marcus Edwards, Gonçalo Inácio, maybe even Ousmane Diomande, even though he's just been there for a few weeks. He's looking like a fantastic player. But Sporting always have some interesting players to keep their eye on, and I do think that they're, that you definitely, as a club, you need to be taking a look at the selling window. You need to be taking a look at the player's contract. I don't have that information on me right now when Goncalves' contract expires, but I do know that he is, I think, 25 years of age. So getting to that stage where perhaps he becomes less marketable as a player. I think that was one of the biggest reasons why Sporting sold Palhinha last summer, even for a fee that, in my opinion, did not register with his value. I believe just 20 million, because he is 27 years of age. At a certain point, after a few more months, you're not going to be able to get the same fee. And at the end of the day, that is always in the back of mind for any Portuguese club, not just Sporting. They are, above all, a business that needs to sell players to survive. And, we've seen that with Sporting after winning the title. I think that, I think that a deep European run could be something that, turns a lot of these teams' attention to Sporting, realizing, wow, they've got a lot of young players. Let's see about, how they would do. And I think that, in contrast to other players such as Marcus Edwards, who, has had some very good performances, but is still kind of trying to find that consistency, Pedro Gonçalves has already had a legendary season at Sporting. Yeah. He's already shown that he can do this at the top level of European football, in the Champions League, in the Europa League, and has been, capable of playing in multiple positions. So yeah, I do think that there's going to be a decent amount of interest for him.
And do you think anyone, the reports are suggesting that there's an 80 million euro release clause, though there's other reports saying that Villa could potentially agree a fee of 40 to 50 million euros. Is that the sort of price bracket you think is most realistic, a sort of 40 to 50, rather than anyone going way up to the 80 million euro territory?
Yeah, I would probably say 40, 50 million is about where I would go. I mean, I think you look at Sporting's recent sales. I think that Matheus Nunes was about 40 million or so, in that range.
Right.
You know, Pedro Porro, I think, was similar. João Palhinha, obviously 20 million, but I think that Pedro Gonçalves, he is an attacking player. Of course, he's capable of scoring goals. I think that, yeah, if he really continues this form, then I could certainly see Sporting getting a decent fee for him in the 40, 50 million range. And I think that, you know, I think that Sporting, they do know that he is very important for Ruben Amorim and for their system. He's been one of their most important players in their rebuild, shall we
Hmm.
say. And I think that um I think Sporting would perhaps prefer to sell other players than him, just because of how important he is to the system. But of course, you have to remember the age and the contract. Those are two big conditions when talking about, when is the right time to sell. So, I would probably expect it to be in the region of 40 million, 50 million. I think probably a little less than what they got for Bruno Fernandes. Sporting are a club that, I don't think they do as good of a job as Benfica when it comes to getting top dollar for their players. But with that being said, they're definitely not going to be able. They're not going to be just handing out their best players for free.
Okay, and I think a key question would be, a player in his mid-20s who's excelled at Sporting, really. He has had experience previously of English football at Wolves, though he didn't really play for them as much as far as I'm aware. Um, how do you think he would suit the Premier League?
I think he would suit the Premier League just fine. I think
Mhm.
that, when you look at the players who have come through the Primera Liga, I think that almost all of them have made a positive impact in the Premier League. Whether that's Bruno Fernandes, Ruben Diaz, Darwin Nunez. Fact is, I mean, there are so many players who are really excelling in this transition. And yeah, I do think that some of the biggest reasons is the environment that the Primera Liga is, and it really demands you to be, yes, very good technically, especially if you're playing for a big team that's going to face a lot of low blocks and disciplined defenses. So, it demands technical brilliance, but it also demands uh physical grit, and
Mm,
that's something that I see every single weekend when I watch Primera Liga matches. These are players who are undergoing some very tough challenges, and
yeah.
and who are having to run and continually show their worth in that regard. So I think that Pedro Gonçalves, despite the fact that he's only 5'6", maybe, he doesn't shy away from that aspect of the game. He knows how to use his body and win a foul. He's going to be capable of playing the right pass on time and pushing the ball forward. Above all, he's just a very intelligent, technically gifted player who, yeah, I think would be very valuable to a lot of teams. I think that, I definitely could see a Premier League team going for him. And it goes without saying that every Sporting player would welcome a move to the Premier League. And I do think that Pedro Gonçalves is perhaps approaching that moment. I don't know if it's this coming summer or the following summer, but approaching that moment where he needs to start thinking about his career, where he wants to be, how much money he wants to make. He's still got plenty of time, but I do think that um I think that the fact that he wasn't called up to the Portugal squad is kind of
Mm.
a slap in the face, considering his impressive form.
Yeah, I was going to say it's
Really
quite
can't get many-
surprising. Surprising he doesn't really seem to feature for Portugal.
And I do feel like potentially that could prompt him to move to
Right.
a Premier League team, because I do think that especially for someone like Roberto Martinez, who of course has coached in England, knows how special that league is. He definitely values players who are playing in the Premier League more than players who are playing in the Primera Liga. And, that has sometimes resulted in, I think, short-sighted decisions from players who are thinking, I need to do what's going to get me on the in the view of the Portugal manager. I
Hmm.
need to go to a big team. We've seen that with players such as Francisco Trincao leaving Braga and going to Barcelona, and how that's almost jeopardized their career at times. But with that being said, Pedro Gonçalves has had very much like it's almost like a career in reverse, because he starts off in Portugal, he goes to Valencia, goes to Wolves, and then goes back to Portugal, joins
Yeah.
a fairly, I don't want to say a small club, but a club with not that much history in Famalicão,
Yeah.
and is really able to make a name for himself. So I think that decision to go to a team like Fama rather than one of the biggest teams in Portugal, that was really important for him to separate himself and kind of showcase that he's a special talent in this team. You can't overstate what he did in his first season. Most people tipped Famalicão to go down, and he was able to take them to the precipice of European football. And of course, I think a lot of people had Sporting finishing outside the top two. This is a team that were in a very precarious position at the time. What he's been able to do under Ruben Amorim, it's just been absolutely fantastic. I mean, when he got there, Sporting were coming off a fourth place finish. They had lost in the Europa League qualifiers a few months after he signed, and they've look at what they've done since then. They've won the league title. They've won cup trophies. They've gotten to the Champions League knockout round.
Hmm.
And now they're in the Europa League quarterfinals. So I think that Pedro Gonçalves, he's very happy where he is right now. He knows that I don't want to say he's always loved by Sporting's fans, because there have been times where it's been kind of, hot and cold, shall we say. But he knows that he has a coach who
Hmm.
recognizes his importance and knows how to get the most out of him. So I don't think he's necessarily in any rush to leave Sporting. But with that being said, if a Premier League offer came to his table, I certainly think he would consider it and would consider leaving the club.
Okay, Zach. Well, that's been absolutely brilliant to hear. And thank you very much for coming on, because I feel like I found out so much about Pedro Gonçalves, and everybody who's watching this will know much more about him. That was really interesting to get your informed take on him. And, just before we go, can we just find out where we can find you online and follow your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Zach Lowy on Twitter, as well as my podcasts. I have several different podcasts. The Cortelinias podcast on Breaking the Lines. That's my Portuguese football podcast. I also have a weekly podcast on Bet Central. That's Zach Lowy's European Football Show. You can find that on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify, as well as my podcast with Phil Brown on Beyond the Pitch, the Global Football Show. And I write for a number of different sites, and I'm also the editor of the website Breaking the Lines. That's BTL Vid on Twitter. So, yeah, we've done a lot of Aston Villa content there, and are going to definitely be doing more over the coming months.